Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. In today's video, I will be going over an old argument I was using in some previous videos of mine, my power scaling of Goku Black and Zamasu, as well as my Dragon Ball Cosmology video, and I'll be going over whether or not Dragon Ball Super characters are fifth dimensional in terms of attack potency. I'm going over this because it's been over a year, and in the old videos I noticed that I didn't really actually explain why these are fifth dimensional. I just mentioned that following a certain line of logic they could be fifth dimensional. So I'll be going over it, I'll be saying the pros and cons of the argument, and giving out loads of supporting evidence for people who want to argue it themselves. Starting off, rehearsing the old argument was, quite oftenly people would determine that there was a dimensional transcendence in the Dragon Ball cosmology. People would always argue where the transcendence was. Would either say it'd be an Otherworld, escaping the macrocosm, or be beyond the timeline itself. Depending on who you ask, they would say the dimensional transcendence was there. And what I simply did is I simply said two of these were correct, and therefore we had two-dimensional transcendences. We're having two-dimensional transcendences above the base, which is a three-dimensional world, would be fifth dimensional. So in this video, I'm going to prove, well, not prove, I'm going to show some reasoning for why each one of them would be a dimensional transcendence, and I want you guys in the comments down below to actually express whether or not you think I'm right. This is an old argument, it's open for interpretation. I'd like to see what people think. So, starting off showing that there's the first dimensional transcendence off the base three-dimensional world, we start looking either at the macrocosm or otherworld. In my old videos, I was mostly implying the macrocosm was where we'd start going into higher dimensions, but really it was otherworld. We know this more concretely now, thanks to some information found by other YouTubers, for example Atari. Atari was able to find a quote from Koyama saying that the otherworld was a higher dimension, and another quote, when asked, does it transcend a dimension, he said yes it does. I went on Koyama's Twitter and I was able to find another statement, one saying that he thinks Otherworld is fourth dimensional. With that, there's good evidence for people who are involved with the series thinking that Otherworld is a higher dimension. However, this is all supporting evidence, not direct evidence. Now, there have also been guides that also state heaven is a higher dimension. Now, I don't know if all these guides are official, nor do I know if all of them talk about Dragon Ball Super. For example, here is an example of a guide saying Otherworld's a higher dimension, but it's talking about a game, so we don't know if the game has the same cosmology as the actual Dragon Ball. It likely does, because the game is based off it, but there's nothing concrete. So again, some of these guides that would say such would be supporting evidence, which help the idea of it being a higher dimension, but still not direct, as in things inside the series.
Now, before we get into direct evidence of Otherworld being a higher dimension, let's talk about some supporting evidence in this series, which is direct, but doesn't show the higher dimensional part. We know the Dragon Ball universe is infinite. There are tons of guides showing this. We also know from not one, not two, but three guides that heaven is the same size as the universe. So heaven is also infinite in size. Now, heaven, despite being infinite 3D, is less than a speck in Otherworld. We have characters looking upwards and you can't even see heaven. Therefore, Otherworld must be absolutely gigantic in comparison to heaven. Some millions, billions times more, if not way more than that. This all helps support the idea that the Otherworld could be a higher dimension, because there are so many implications of it being beyond infinite 3D.
Now we start getting to the more direct evidence. So the direct evidence showing that Otherworld would be a higher dimension, we'll be looking at how time is affected in Dragon Ball when you are in Otherworld. See, it is stated in the Dragon Ball manga that when Goku was in the living world, time flowed different compared to when he was in the Otherworld. Time flowing different would imply that there is a dimensional barrier that separates the flow of time between both spaces. This is why in the old one, I would say the macrocosm was a higher dimension instead of just Otherworld. However, considering the supporting evidence of it being larger than an infinite-sized universe, bigger than infinite 3D, and the evidence of guidebooks as well as writers thinking that it is a higher dimension, it makes sense that Otherworld was a higher dimension. So we can say that this displacement of having time flow differently in Otherworld would be evidence that it is a higher dimension than the normal one, which would make it fourth dimensional. Quick side note, using this argumentation that the flow of time changes when you're going between dimensions, therefore you're showing a higher dimension level of reality, or that the dimension itself must be a higher dimension because the flow of time's changed, we can use these to say that when Vegeta in the Goku Black Arc was able to bust out of the time chamber, he was affecting a higher dimensional space. This would mean, in terms of versus debating, that his attack potency in just his base form is universal plus. Some people don't like that. It is supported with the Buu Saga statement that Dende says it's another dimension, but the main focus for it being Uni Plus would be the time chamber has a different flow of time to the universe, therefore busting out of it and going into a new time stream from busting it would be universal plus. This is also shown in the manga as well, where he did also bust out the time chamber. So both base Vegeta in the manga and anime of the Goku Black Arc post time chamber training would have been universal plus. Another side note, because you can never have too many side notes, Otherworld being a higher dimension, along with Living World being its opposite plus equal sort of thing, we know that both of them would be a higher dimension. Therefore, destroying both of these would be considered low multiversal, but 2 times universes. Simply destroying twice the size of a universal 2 infinite spaces isn't enough to be uni plus, and thus the same argument applies to low multiversal. You need to destroy 2 distinguishedly separate universal plus structures. Distinguishedly separate meaning that they aren't connected. Otherworld and the living world are separated by like life and death, therefore it'd work. We can also extend this further on using the Supreme Kai realm and the other macrocosms to go higher into low multiversal. Now, for what's probably the more juicy part of the video, we're going to talk about how we can get the next dimensional transcendence from the timeline. Surprisingly, on Versus Battle Wiki, this is the more convincing of the 2-dimensional transcendences, and this is their current argument for proving Infinite Zamasu is universal plus. Very interesting. Anyhow, looking at the argument, how it works is when you go between timelines, there's a space between it. We actually see this space in the anime with Trunks' time machine when he runs from Goku Black. This space has a non-linear flow of time. The time is completely different, because you can go in this space and go to another timeline that is your own past and create branches from it. This is how the time machine works in Dragon Ball, and how we can get brand new timelines in Dragon Ball without using the many world theory implied in the original Android saga. So we can use the argument of there being a non-linear flow of time to say that time itself, as well as the space between timelines, is a higher dimension. This means characters who would scale to such would be 5th dimensional. Supporting evidence to this, in the manga, when Supreme Kai is trying to travel between timelines using the time ring, he states it took him a couple times because the dimensional barriers are hard to navigate. There being dimensional barriers also implies that there is a higher dimension between each timeline, as the barrier is what separates dimensional levels. Therefore, we can conclude that the timeline very likely is 5th dimensional. It sadly doesn't have as much wildly consistent evidence as the Otherworld, however, the argument is still there. With that being said, like I asked at the beginning of this video, I want you to pause it, comment down below whether or not you agree with Otherworld being a higher dimension, and if you agree with the timeline being a higher dimension from Otherworld, thus being 5D. If you disagree, say what you think in the comments down below. It'd be interesting to see what everyone says. Some people will agree, some will disagree. Let's see it. Now, earlier I mentioned scaling to the Uni Plus using the time chamber and using a Buhan's feat in the Buu Saga. There are more examples, but we can stick to those ones. I think the Dragon Ball community has tons of examples to get to Uni Plus anyway. However, scaling to the timeline isn't something that many characters have been known to do. So I'll just go over some examples of characters scaling to the timeline quickly for people who want to use the 5th dimensional argument. Let's start off with what is clearly the most obvious, Infinite Zamasu. Everyone can think of it, Infinite Zamasu. He grew so large that he was felt in the space beyond the timeline, between timelines in fact, and he was shown to entering the present. Him entering the present was visually observed by the Pilaf gang, not just people who could sense energy, meaning it was more than just them feeling Zamasu's ki, but in fact his actual presence reaching that far. We also see this presence squint when Xeno kills him. Now for the next form of scaling to the space between timelines, we look at Goku Black in the anime. I mentioned this before in my Goku Black and Zamasu video, but Goku Black's scythe was able to cut a hole in space. He then describes this hole and the energy pulling out from it, saying it's another universe, a timeline, or something even beyond the timeline, and he says it's beyond his understanding. Considering it's beyond his understanding, and he mentions beyond the timeline, it makes sense that it was beyond the timeline. Furthermore, it being beyond his understanding would mean it'd be beyond things that he's fully conscious about. He's fully conscious about the timelines, he travels between timelines, as well as the fact that he asked Zuno all the information he'd like to do before he corrected his Zero Mortals plan, meaning he wants to know everything about the timeline. The third argument is one that can be applied both to the anime and manga, so if you agree with 5th Dimensional Dragon Ball, you can have 5th Dimensional Dragon Ball in the manga as well. God of Destructions, when they use a Hakai to try and erase someone from space and time, it seems like, this would create a new time ring if the erasure couldn't be done. They have the raw power that time cannot stop this happening and instead has to force a new timeline. Either that or the backlash of it not working literally creates a new timeline where it would have worked. Either way, the raw energy of a God of Destruction's Hakai is able to scale to a timeline and thus should be 5th dimensional as well. This is directly shown in the manga. We actually see a brand new time ring being made, and it's stated in the anime, and we later see a time ring there as well. So there we have it. As asked by people when I pulled my poll up for the next video, I've given out my old 5th dimensional Dragon Ball arguments and a lot of evidence supporting it. Whether or not you agree or disagree, I've asked you to say in the comments section down below. Hopefully you've already done that. Also, at the end of this video, I'll be posting another poll to check out my community part if you want to vote on what you want the next video to be. I haven't decided right as the recording of this video what that's going to be, but there will be another poll so people can decide when and what the next video can be on.
Now let's do a bonus just for some fun. If you agree that a game guidebook, like the one that was used for Otherworld, is fine as long as it doesn't contradict already existing material, then we can use that argument to actually get Dragon Ball to infinite dimensional. How do we do this? Quite simple. First we use this one guide saying the difference between second and third form Frieza is a dimensional difference, and we say that Cell has a power level of infinity using these 3 statements. Power level of infinity when a finite power level difference is a dimensional difference, infinite dimensional Cell. So if you think 5-dimensional Dragon Ball is an exaggeration, you can get much, much higher. Hope you enjoy that quickly.
Thank you everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed today's video. My previous video was a collaboration with myself and Korin Keefe in a video of Chaos King against Zalgo. Hope you guys enjoyed that video. I also recommend checking out Korin O'Keefe's channel as well as the channel Captain Forest. Both of them have posted more videos than I have lately, so if you want to entertain yourself, you've got more to look at checking out their channels. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you all in the next video. Remember to look at the poll to find out what it is.